What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another episode of the KT series. And in this episode, we're gonna be talking about your key connection from yourself to the fish, and that is your fishing line. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to learning. Alright guys, so before we get into it, this video is brought to you by barbcatchfishing.com. Barbcatchfishing.com is an online resource that you can check out if you wanted to learn a little bit more on different kinds of techniques, baits, gear, and things of that nature. So if you are ready to level up your fishing game, go ahead and check out barbcatchfishing.com. All right guys, so kind of getting into it, when you go into a store, you'll probably be overwhelmed by the amount of line that you'll see out on the shelves. Now, in this video, hopefully you'll be able to take some key points away, but not all lines are created equal. And within this video, we're gonna go ahead and talk about the little nuances that make these lines different from one another and talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of each and how you as the consumer can go in with confidence and buy the right line for your needs. So starting off, we're gonna talk about 4 different kinds of lines that we have here. So the first one being monofilament. So monofilament, as you guys can kind of see there, also known as mono, is going to be more of your readily available or more easily available kind of line because it is the oldest kind of technology that is out there when it comes to fishing line. It's also going to be the most budget friendly. So if you are on a budget, then going with mono is going to be the one for you compared to all of these other lines here. But some of the advantages of monofilament is the fact that it's buoyant, meaning that it naturally floats. So when you are fishing topwater lures such as, poppers, walking baits, whopper ploppers, things like that, you definitely want to have a line that won't impede the action of that lure, and that's with a floating line such as monofilament. Now, some of the things that monofilament, some of the characteristics within monofilament is going to be its stretch. So these lines have a natural tendency to stretch with the exception of braid, but we're going to talk about that later. But monofilament actually has the highest stretch rating. Monofilament will stretch about 20 to 30%. So putting that into real life kind of scenarios, if you were to cast out 100 feet, and you get bit, you're gonna have about a 20 to 30 foot stretch in order to get to that bait and actually be able to drive that hook into the fish. So the reason why that's important is because you wanna make sure that you are pairing the right gear to the line that you're using. Now, again, because this line stretches so much, you wanna have a rod that's more on the fast action side, just because you want something with a higher backbone, higher rating when it comes to the actual action itself, just because the stretch of this line. So yeah, definitely gonna be one of the more readily available lines here. Has the highest amount of stretch, but it also has the highest amount of memory that I've experienced. Now, memory is basically when you spool up the reel with your line and you leave it on there for a little while. What tends to happen is the actual material of the line itself will start to coil up whenever you cast. Now, that's obviously going to be detrimental to your casting distance as well as your lure presentations, because when your line coils, it'll have a natural tendency to kind of try to slinky back together. And if you're, fishing a technique where you don't want to have any kind of extra movement, such as with a jerkbait, having a coiled line will definitely mess that presentation up. But either way, guys, going back over to monofilament, this is going to be your most available line material that you can buy. It's also going to be the cheapest. And if you are fishing a top water, this is the line that I would recommend using. I would also recommend this if you are fishing any kind of presentations where you need that stretch, because maybe if your rod is a little bit more on the stiff side and you are just, you know, smashing the hook sets, having something that can stretch out a little bit and kind of absorb that hook set can give you a little bit more of an advantage and put some more fish in the boat. Going from there, we're going to be talking about copolymer. So copolymer line is like a in-between of monofilament and fluorocarbon, and essentially it is a monofilament line with a blend of fluorocarbon. So this one will actually sink a little bit faster than monofilament will. So it's a very, very good versatile kind of line that I would honestly say it would be good for really all kinds of presentations. Now, I say that because of my experience with this line. So I carry 10 rods with me on the kayak. 7 of them are actually spooled up with copolymer. And again, because this is a very versatile kind of line, it also doesn't really break the bank either. So the cost of this is kind of competitive to the cost of monofilament, with the versatility of it being a sinking kind of line. So you could use this for those bottom contact baits, you could use this for those reaction style baits, you could use it for top waters, so on and so forth. So copolymer is definitely going to be one of the ones that I would normally recommend to people, just because of its budget friendliness as well as its versatility. When it comes to the actual stretch factor, copolymer doesn't stretch as much as monofilament does, but it does have a little bit of stretch. I would say maybe like a 10 to 15% stretch. So still stretches, doesn't stretch as much as monofilament, but again, depending on the technique that you are throwing, copolymer will basically cover almost all of the techniques that you would be throwing out there out on the water. So from here, we're gonna go ahead and talk about fluorocarbon. So fluorocarbon is gonna be one of those newer technologies that have been out, at least compared to monofilament. Monofilament was like one of the first lines that ever came out when it came to actual fishing, and then copolymers, and then it would be fluorocarbon. So fluorocarbon, the reason why fluorocarbon is so great is because one, it's a sinking line. So if you are fishing bottom contact baits and you needed that line or that presentation to sink down faster, you'd want to use a fluorocarbon line compared to a monofilament or a copolymer. Another huge advantage as well is the fact that it is virtually invisible underwater. So because of the material that it is made out of, it actually refracts sunlight and water very, very well. So it is very, very invisible underwater. So if you are around finicky line shy fish, definitely going with a fluorocarbon would be the best move out of all of these other lines. A little bit more on the expensive side. We're gonna go into, you know, the price differences later on this video, but fluorocarbon is definitely what I'm gonna be using for the bottom contact baits. This is what I'm gonna use for line shy kind of fish, and it's ultimately what I'm gonna use when I am trying to finesse fish. So when I'm trying to coax fish into biting as opposed to forcing them to bite off of a reaction, I want to have the most advantages on my side, and fluorocarbon gives me that kind of advantage. So from there, we're going to talk about braid. So braid is a different kind of material. It's not like this plastic nylon kind of type material that you'll see with monofilament, copolymer, or fluorocarbon. Braid is actually like woven strands of thread, essentially. I think that's the easiest way that I could kind of compare that. And when it comes to braid, braid has zero stretch. So with it having virtually no stretch, you get the maximum amount of sensitivity throughout the line. Now, that can be an advantage to a lot of things, but it can also be a disadvantage. So for an example, if I'm trying to fish a crankbait and I'm throwing it on straight braid, because that line doesn't have any kind of stretch, I will most likely lose a lot more fish compared to copolymer, fluorocarbon, or monofilament because of zero give within the actual line itself. So if you were to think about, if you're fighting a fish, think about it as like it's a slingshot, where if it becomes too tight, it's just gonna fly out. And that's essentially what braid is. Braid is zero stretch, so it can be a little bit too much depending on the technique that you are fishing. Where this comes in handy though, where having zero stretch comes in handy, is in close quarters, or if you are trying to horse fish out of specific areas such as like laydowns or grass mats or vegetation and things like that. You want to have something that has less stretch, because you definitely you want to get that fish out of that cover as soon as possible and get it in the boat. So so those are some of the key advantages of each of these lines here. Going back to braid, I forgot. So braid is obviously kind of different. You'll see that because it is a threaded woven kind of material, they use artificial dyes to kind of help with camouflaging the line within the water column. Now obviously there's no line out there that looks blue and yellow, but they do make braid in like green. They make it in like a lighter green, a moss green. They make it in black. Generally what I recommend, especially with the way that I fish braid, is using a high visibility kind of color. So anything that's orange or yellow, or these vibrant colors, because it's easier for me to visually detect a bite with something that's contrasting the color of the water as opposed to trying to camouflage into it. So just a tip from myself to you guys. I personally recommend using a different colored braid, or something that's bright and vibrant, so that you can see those bites whenever you do get them. So yeah, so those are going to be some of the key advantages of each of these lines here. To kind of summarize everything, if you are on a budget or if you're fishing topwaters, go with the monofilament. If you are just looking for a general purpose, all around good line, and you have the ability to order it online, go with the copolymer. If you are looking to be more on the stealthy side and you are around fish that are line shy, definitely go with the fluorocarbon. And if you need the ultimate sensitivity, zero stretch, and you need to horse these fish out, go with the braid. So going over to like the price points of each, again, it's gonna go from least to greatest when it comes to price points. You're gonna be looking at your monofilaments being the cheapest, then it's gonna be your copolymers, then it's gonna be your fluorocarbons, and then it's gonna be your braid. Or realistically, braid and fluorocarbon, they're kind of the same depending on what brand you get. But the reason why they're more expensive is because of the cost versus the quantity of what you get. So for an example, this 700-yard spool of line probably cost me, I would say, roughly around like $10 from Bass Pro Shop. This is their in-house brand line, so it's not the most expensive thing, and it's relatively available whenever you walk into a Bass Pro Shop, and their stuff is actually really good for being on a budget. Then from there, we're gonna go over to our copolymers. Now, as you guys can kind of see here, this is a 1,200-yard spool of copolymer line. And this is one of the reasons why I choose this line over all of these other lines, is because one, the versatility of it, but two, the cost of it. So this 1,200-yard spool of 12-pound line costs $16. So 1,200 yards, you'll be able to spool at least 6, 7, maybe even 8 rods and still have some left over. So when it comes to the actual price point, going with a monofilament or going with a copolymer is going to be the best bang for your buck, because when your rods start to get that line coil, or when that line starts to get that memory, you're going to want to re-spool that line. And re-spooling fluorocarbon isn't cheap. Like, this 200-yard spool is $25. So $25 for fluorocarbon for 200 yards versus $16 for 1,200 yards of copolymer. And again, this isn't to like bash fluorocarbon and tell you which one's better than the other, because each line has a different role, they have their different purposes, and that's the reason why their prices reflect the way that they do. But for somebody like me that's a little bit more budget minded, I want to get something that, one, won't break the bank, and two, would be the most versatile. So that's why I go with the copolymer. Now, braid honestly is a very, very good initial investment, because you have because you don't have to spool as often, because braid doesn't really have any kind of memory. It doesn't take any kind of memory. Realistically, if you buy a spool of braid and you spool it up to one of your rods, that's probably the first and last time you're gonna spool it up for a few years down the road, to be honest, depending on whether or not you just blow up your reel for whatever reason. Braided line actually lasts a very, very long time. And that's why braid, it is expensive initially. Like, this 330 yards of X12 cost me $60, but I was able to spool both of my spinning rods with this line, and I don't really foresee myself having to re-spool those reels unless either I wanted to completely swap out the line, or if maybe like the whole entire spool gets ruined some way, somehow. Other than that, I'm probably never gonna spool those rods with new braid for at least quite a while. So one of the tips that I could give you guys, especially for more of those budget anglers where you guys just don't have the funds to constantly re-spool your rods, initially I would go with the braid. The reason being is because because of the way that braid is made, you can kind of see, I don't know if that'll pick it up in the camera, but this braid has a very, very thin diameter. And because the diameter is so thin, that allows you to cast further and more accurately. So going into kind of line diameter, a lot of people kind of overlook that, because majority of the times when you go inside the store, you want to buy a line that is, you want to buy the strongest line because you don't want to break off with these fish and things like that, without really realizing that having a line that's too thick can actually be detrimental to your overall fishing experience. So one of the examples that I could give off is if you're fishing a crankbait, most crankbaits, when these manufacturers do testing on their crankbaits, they use like a 10 to 12 pound breaking strength line. And basically what that does is that it gives them an idea of how deep that crankbait can run. So if these manufacturers are testing at 10-pound breaking strength, and you're casting this crankbait, the same exact crankbait, out with 17-pound line, you'll find that the crankbait will actually run shallower than what it says on the box, because that diameter of line is thicker and it causes drag within the water column. So little nuances like that is definitely something you guys want to take into consideration. The diameter of the line plays a huge role into how well your bait is going to be presented and whether or not it could actually run at its optimal water column depth. So again, because braid, because of the way it's manufactured, because it's so thin yet it has a high breaking strength, I would highly recommend that you have a braid and then have a fluorocarbon or copolymer leader, which I normally run on all of my spinning rods. So that's basically going to be the overall gist of what you guys are going to see when it comes to buying fishing line. Is you're going to see what kind of line it is, whether it be, you know, monofilament, copolymer, fluorocarbon, or braid. You're going to see the breaking strength on it. So as you guys kind of see here, this is 8-pound breaking strength and it's fairly thin. You are to compare that to 17-pound, oh, if that kind of focuses there, 17-pound. If you were to compare the thickness of a line there versus the thickness of a line here, again, I don't know if the camera is going to catch that, but the one on this one right here is going to be your 17-pound. This one right here is going to be your 8-pound. So I don't know if the camera is going to pick that up, but you could obviously see that there is a big difference in line diameter and line thickness. And again, the thinner the line, the better generally, but also the weaker it is. But that's why braid is such a good line to have, especially if you're not looking to re-spool all the time. It's always good to have braid because you have a thinner diameter line with a higher breaking strength, and it doesn't have any memory. It doesn't create any kind of memory when it's around this spool of your reel. So to kind of summarize everything, again, monofilament for top waters and if you're on a budget, copolymers if you are looking for a more versatile all-around line that doesn't break the bank, fluorocarbons if you need that stealth and abrasion resistance, and then braid if you need the thinnest diameter line with zero stretch and the highest breaking strength. But all right, guys, so that's really gonna wrap it up for this video. Oh, another thing that I need to mention as well is when it comes to braid, because it has zero stretch, that also affects the action of your rod. What I mean by that is if you have a medium heavy power rod with a fast tip or a fast action, when you put braid on that, because there's zero stretch on it, it essentially makes that rod like a heavy power extra fast action, because there is no stretch, there's no forgiveness, there's nothing that's absorbing the shock of your hook set other than your rod. So keep that in mind as well. If you ever needed to have more sensitivity and you needed a little bit more backbone or a little bit more hook set power, braid is the way to go. But yeah, that's gonna be my final tip for you guys. Again, thank you guys for listening along. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two, and hopefully you guys will be able to take some of this information out there and apply it for when you are buying fishing line. But as always, guys, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for liking, subscribing, joining me for my adventures on the water, and I will see you guys in the next one.